ever feel like just keeping up with the news is a job in itself?
Yeah, same.
Like you need a decoder ring just to understand what you're even looking at half the time.
Absolutely, right?
That's what we're doing here today.
Yeah.
We're diving deep
Yeah.
into some of the most important global issues and current events.
And trying to make sense of them.
Beyond the headlines, beyond the jargon.
Provide a little bit of context, a little bit of analysis.
Exactly.
Because, we're all busy.
Yeah.
We don't all have time to read every article and every report, right?
And even if you did,
Right.
sometimes it's really hard to see the forest for the trees.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's about connecting those dots.
Yeah. So let's jump right in.
Okay.
One of the things you sent over that I found really fascinating was an article about the escalating tensions in the Eastern Mediterranean.
Right.
And I have to admit, I've been sort of vaguely aware of some tension there, but I haven't really understood the full context.
Yeah, and that's often the case, right? We see these headlines, but we don't always have the background. So in this specific situation, you've got a lot of different factors at play. You've got historical territorial disputes. You've got the discovery of offshore energy reserves.
Right, which is interesting because that has implications way beyond just those countries involved.
Exactly. And that's what makes this so crucial. This isn't just a regional conflict. It has the potential to impact global energy prices, maritime trade routes.
So it could affect, like, my gas prices.
Potentially, yeah. And that's just one example of how a seemingly distant issue can have very real consequences.
It's like that butterfly effect thing.
Exactly. Exactly.
And speaking of interconnectedness, another thing you sent over that really got me thinking was that report on climate change and migration patterns in Southeast Asia.
Right.
And I'll be honest, when I first saw those figures, I was like, wait, what's going on here?
Right. It's not always intuitive. But when you look at the historical climate data for the region, you start to see a pattern of increasingly severe weather events.
Right. Droughts one year, floods the next.
Exactly.
And it's forcing people to leave their homes, their livelihoods.
Absolutely. And that leads to a whole other set of issues.
Like, where do they go? What happens to them?
Precisely. It puts a strain on resources, on infrastructure, and it can even lead to political instability.
And suddenly we're seeing those connections again.
Right. It's all intertwined.
And that's what I think is so important about, doing these deep dives.
Right.
Because it's so easy to just skim the headlines and move on. But when we take the time to really understand the context, the history, the interconnectedness of these issues.
It allows us to engage in a much more meaningful way.
Exactly. And to maybe even start thinking about solutions.
Absolutely.
Well, on that note, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today.
I think so. And I would add just one final thought. As we become more aware of these global challenges, it's also important to remember that we all have a role to play in addressing them.
So that's our deep dive for today. We hope you found it informative, thought-provoking, and maybe even a little bit empowering. Join us next time as we continue to explore the forces shaping our world.
And in the meantime, keep asking those questions, keep making those connections, because the more informed we are, the better equipped we'll be to navigate the complexities of our world.
This has been a Project NJ Studios production.